Everyone has been talking about one thing since House of the Dragon Season 3 Episode 2 ended. Aemond Targaryen has finally arrived at Harrenhal. On the surface, it looks like another strategic move in the Dance of the Dragons, another castle changing hands in a war that's growing bloodier by the day. But hidden beneath the fire, the executions, and the eerie silence of Harrenhal is something far more important. The show didn't just move Aemond across the map, it quietly moved him onto the exact path that leads to one of the most legendary deaths in all of George R.R. Martin's history. And the biggest surprise isn't that book readers already know how Aemond dies. It's that this episode completely changes why he dies. Almost every scene contains a clue pointing toward the same destination. From the way Aemond carries himself after the Battle of the Gullet, to the people he chooses to kill, the wound he suffers, and even the moment he comes face to face with Alys Rivers. None of those moments exist simply to move the plot forward. They're carefully arranged pieces of a much larger puzzle. Looking back, this episode isn't about Harrenhal at all. It's about destiny. More specifically, it's about a man who believes he's shaping the future when, in reality, every decision is pulling him closer to an ending that has been waiting for him since the day he claimed Vhagar. Once you connect those clues, Aemond's final battle at the God's Eye stops feeling like a shocking ending and starts looking like the only ending his story could ever have. Before we uncover everything hidden inside this episode, if you enjoy deep dives into House of the Dragon, where every theory is researched from scratch and every script is written by hand instead of stitched together from summaries, make sure you're subscribed. This channel is all about finding the details that are easy to miss, connecting clues across episodes, and exploring the lore that makes George R.R. Martin's world so fascinating. Subscribing really helps the channel continue making these long-form breakdowns and reach more fans who love digging into Westeros as much as we do. And with that said, here's your spoiler warning. We'll be discussing major events from both the series and Fire and Blood, including one of the most iconic moments of the Dance of the Dragons. The first clue arrives the moment Aemond reaches Harrenhal. On paper, capturing the largest castle in Westeros is a brilliant military victory. Harrenhal sits at the heart of the Riverlands, controlling roads, armies, and supplies. Any commander would want to hold it. But this explains why the location matters far beyond strategy. Harrenhal has never been just another castle. Ever since Aegon the Conqueror reduced it to molten stone with Balerion, the fortress has carried a reputation unlike anywhere else in the Seven Kingdoms. Every great house that has claimed Harrenhal has eventually fallen into ruin. The castle has outlived kings, destroyed bloodlines, and witnessed countless betrayals. Whether its curse is real, or simply the result of history repeating itself, hardly matters anymore, because everyone who enters Harrenhal eventually becomes part of that history. The show revealed this long before Aemond ever stepped through its gates. Daemon's visions, the whispers echoing through empty halls, and the castle's oppressive atmosphere all reinforce the idea that Harrenhal doesn't simply shelter people. It exposes them. It strips away their certainty until they confront the parts of themselves they've spent years trying to ignore. That becomes incredibly important, because Aemond arrives believing he has never been stronger. After the Battle of the Gullet, he commands the largest dragon alive, leads the Green's military campaign, and has become one of the most feared men in Westeros. From his perspective, Harrenhal is another prize waiting to be claimed. But hidden in that confidence is the exact flaw. George R.R. Martin has been building since Aemond first appeared as a child. Aemond has always believed that power is something you possess. Daemon understands that power is something that consumes you. At first glance, both men look remarkably similar. Both are exceptional swordsmen. Both are fearless dragon riders. Both are second sons who spent years living in the shadow of their older brothers. Both built terrifying reputations that spread across Westeros long before armies ever reached the battlefield. Yet beneath those similarities lies one critical difference that explains everything. Daemon knows exactly what kind of monster he has become. Aemond still believes he's the hero of his own story. That difference has shaped nearly every decision Aemond has made. Claiming Vhagar transformed him from the lonely prince mocked by his own family into one of the most dangerous people alive. Losing an eye became the defining moment of his identity, convincing him that suffering made him stronger and cruelty made him respected. Over time, that belief hardened into something much darker. Every victory reinforced the idea that fear was the same thing as authority. Every act of violence convinced him he was becoming the legendary warrior he had always admired. But the episode quietly confirms that his confidence is beginning to crack. His injury matters for more than the physical pain it causes. It reminds viewers that even the rider of Vhagar is still vulnerable. For the first time in a long while, Aemond looks less like an unstoppable conqueror, and more like a man carrying wounds that can't simply be hidden beneath armor and confidence. The biggest clue comes immediately afterward. Instead of surrounding Aemond with generals or loyal soldiers, the writers place him in the company of Alys Rivers. That moment wasn't random. In Fire and Blood, Alys has always existed on the edge of myth. Some describe her as a healer, others call her a witch. Rumors claim she can see visions, speak to spirits, or understand truths hidden from ordinary people. George R.R. Martin never confirms exactly who or what Alys is, and that's precisely what makes her so compelling. She represents uncertainty in a world obsessed with power. Kings rely on armies, lords rely on castles, dragon riders rely on fire. Alys relies on knowledge that no sword can cut and no dragon can burn away. The show leans into that mystery almost immediately. Their meeting isn't framed like a simple conversation between strangers. Instead, it carries the unsettling feeling that Alys already understands far more about Aemond than he understands about himself. She doesn't appear intimidated by the prince who commands Vhagar. She doesn't treat him as an untouchable conqueror. If anything, her calmness suggests she's looking beyond the title, beyond the dragon, and beyond the fear he inspires. This explains why so many readers have viewed Alys as one of the most dangerous people in the dance. Despite never leading an army or riding a dragon, information has always been more powerful than steel in George R.R. Martin's world. Characters like Varys, Bloodraven, and even Bran Stark demonstrate that the people who understand the future often influence it more effectively than those who try to conquer it through force. And that raises a fascinating question. If Alys truly sees fragments of what's coming, why does she stay beside Aemond? Why doesn't she warn him? Why doesn't she try to change his fate? Or has she already accepted that some destinies cannot be avoided? Looking back, this scene carries an entirely different meaning because it suggests Aemond hasn't arrived at Harrenhal to begin a new chapter of the war. He's arrived at the place where the final chapter of his life truly begins. The more closely you compare Daemon and Aemond, the harder it becomes to ignore what the writers have been building since the very beginning of House of the Dragon. This rivalry has never been about choosing sides in the Dance of the Dragons. It's about watching two men walk the same road from opposite directions. Aemond spent his entire life trying to become the next Aemond Targaryen, and in many ways he succeeded. He became the fearless dragon rider everyone feared. He mastered the sword. He embraced danger instead of running from it. Even his appearance, with the sapphire replacing his lost eye and his long silver hair, transformed him into a figure that commanded attention the moment he entered a room. But hidden beneath all of that confidence is a painful truth that this episode quietly reinforces. Aemond copied Daemon's image without ever understanding the man behind it. He learned how to inspire fear, but he never learned when fear becomes a weakness. He learned how to win battles, but not how to survive the consequences of them. That difference explains why these two characters have always been destined to meet at the God's Eye. They aren't simply enemies fighting over a throne. They're reflections staring into a mirror, each representing the life the other could have lived under different circumstances. This explains why Harrenhal is such an important setting for both of them. Daemon's time in the castle forced him to confront memories, regrets, and choices that had followed him for years. The visions weren't just supernatural spectacles. They stripped away the legend surrounding Daemon and exposed the man beneath it. He was forced to examine his failures as a husband, a brother, a father, and a warrior. Whether every vision was magical or psychological almost doesn't matter because the result was the same. Daemon left Harrenhal changed. He emerged with a clearer understanding of what truly mattered, and that transformation became one of the most significant turning points in his journey. Aemond, however, walks into the very same castle with the exact opposite mindset. Instead of questioning himself, he believes every brutal decision he makes proves that he deserves to rule through fear. Looking back, this scene carries an entirely different meaning. Because Harrenhal has already tested one Targaryen, now it's testing another. The show revealed something equally important through Aemond's treatment of House Strong. His decision to burn Harrenhal and execute members of the family isn't simply another display of cruelty. It's a declaration that anyone standing between him and absolute control has become disposable. On the surface, those killings send a political message to the River Lords. Defy the Greens, and this is your fate. But beneath that political calculation lies something much darker. Every execution pushes Aemond further away from being a commander and closer to becoming a force of destruction. George R.R. Martin has always drawn a clear distinction between leaders who use violence as a tool and leaders who become consumed by it. Once violence becomes part of a character's identity, it starts making decisions for them. That's exactly where Aemond finds himself. He no longer burns villages because they're strategically important. He burns them because terror has become his language. Every fire convinces him he's tightening his grip on Westeros, while in reality, every act of destruction isolates him even further. The answer has been hiding in plain sight ever since Luke Valerian's death. That moment wasn't simply the first major tragedy of the Civil War. It was the moment Aemond lost control of his own story. The show made it clear that Vhagar acted on instinct, ignoring her rider's commands before killing Lucerys above Storm's End. That single scene changed everything, because it shattered the illusion that Aemond truly controlled the greatest dragon alive. From that point forward, the relationship between rider and dragon became far more complicated than either side wanted to admit. Vhagar is ancient. She survived Aegon's conquest. She fought beside Visenya Targaryen. She remembers wars that no living human witnessed. Dragons are not horses waiting for commands. They're living weapons with instincts, memories, and tempers of their own. Aemond believed claiming Vhagar made him the most powerful man in Westeros. Instead, it bound him to a force that often chooses violence before reason. That connection becomes incredibly important when you consider where his story ultimately ends. During the battle above the God's Eye in Fire and Blood, Vhagar enters one final duel against Caraxes. On paper, the outcome should never be in doubt. Vhagar is larger, older, and stronger than Daemon's dragon. She has survived countless battles and carries centuries of experience. Caraxes, while terrifying in his own right, simply doesn't match Vhagar's raw size. If dragon combat were decided by strength alone, Daemon would never have stood a chance. But George R.R. Martin has never written battles that way. The strongest fighter rarely wins because of strength alone. Intelligence, timing, sacrifice, and the willingness to embrace impossible odds often matter far more than brute force. That philosophy appears again and again throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Dance of the Dragons is no exception. This explains why Daemon's reputation continues to grow even decades after his death. He understands something Aemond never does. Victory isn't always about surviving. Sometimes it's about ending a threat so completely that history itself changes course. Everything points toward that realization becoming the emotional core of God's Eye when the show finally reaches it. Daemon doesn't enter that battle expecting to fly away. He enters knowing exactly what the cost will be. That's what makes his final leap one of the greatest moments George R.R. Martin has ever written. It's not simply an incredible feat of courage. It's the culmination of an entire lifetime spent accepting consequences that most people would spend their lives avoiding. Now compare that to Aemond's current position in Season 3. He still believes every battle can be won. Every enemy can be burned. Every problem can be solved through overwhelming force. That's why his conversations with Alys Rivers become so fascinating. She represents everything Aemond cannot control. He understands soldiers, he understands castles, he understands dragons. But he doesn't understand prophecy. He doesn't understand visions. He doesn't understand the strange relationship Harrenhal has with memory, death, and fate. Hidden in every interaction between them is the feeling that Alys isn't impressed by power because she's looking beyond it. She's watching events unfold from a perspective no military commander could ever possess. One detail almost everyone overlooked is how calm Alys remains around a man who terrifies nearly everyone else. Fear has become Aemond's greatest weapon. Kings obey him because they fear Vhagar. Lords surrender because they fear Dragonfire. Even allies choose their words carefully because they understand how unpredictable he has become. Yet Alys strips away that advantage without lifting a sword. She doesn't challenge Aemond through strength. She challenges him by refusing to acknowledge the image he spent years creating. It's a subtle moment, but it completely reframes their relationship. For perhaps the first time since claiming Vhagar, Aemond is standing before someone who sees him not as a legendary dragon lord, but as a man walking toward an ending he doesn't yet recognize. And that's what makes Harrenhal so dangerous. It doesn't destroy people overnight. It slowly peels away every illusion they've built around themselves. Daemon confronted that truth and emerged with clarity. Aemond is only beginning that journey, and every clue suggests he won't survive what waits at the end of it. By bringing him to Harrenhal now, the writers aren't delaying his story, they're accelerating it. The castle has become the place where ambition collides with destiny, where power meets prophecy, and where the road to the God's Eye quietly begins long before either dragon ever takes flight.